And welcome to round one coverage here of the World Championship. Marshall Sutcliffe with Paul Cheon, and we've got booster draft here to kick things off. Paulo Vitor Damo da Rosa was our featured drafter. We're going to get a chance to watch him play his black-white deck against kind of a spicy one here from Rei Sato, Paul. He's got a three-color deck that is splashing for red, and I'm really curious to see how this matchup plays out. Paulo ended up on a little bit more of a mid-range control version of black-white. You know, his deck does have decent fast starts, but won't be able to do that consistently. You know, he's not really the combat trick end of things. And he even has Vanquish the Horde as his big sweeper. But if you look at the list from Rei Sato, he can grind. His deck has a lot of value associated with it, particularly coming out of the graveyard in the form of flashback.
Yeah, I think if Paulo does want to kind of get this game or get this matchup, because if the games do go long, Monty touched on it before, Ray does have tons of flashback cards. He has access to those two Seize the Storms, which is really hard to beat kind of in the late game. So Paulo does have the ability to have those starts. He does have the two Flesh Takers. He does have the Ecstatic Awakeners. But if he doesn't get off to the quick start, I might be leaning towards Rei Sato if the game goes long.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is we really need to see Ecstatic Awakeners in the opener here for Paulo to make that really fast start happen. And he found it just a little bit too late here. He draws one here on the second turn. He's going to run out the Occultist instead. Unblinking Observer is going to kick off the festivities here for Sato. But we're going to see that grind start now, Paul. No way out here for Paulo. Gives him a really nice turn 4 where he can play the Ecstatic Awakener and sacrifice the Decayed Zombie to get his card back and grow the Awakener. And in the meantime, well, he's hitting up that hand here for Sato. Sato has an easy choice with Seize the Storm. The question is, what's the other card that he wants to get rid of?
Interesting. He actually chose to go for the Nebelgas Intruder, which he could have played that turn.
Paulo's going to hold back on the attack here, keeping that Unblinking Observer at bay. Dawnheart Rejuvenator is going to come down, and that could open up the Seize the Storm for down the line. But right now, it's not doing a whole lot. Let's see if what Paulo's line is for this turn. I mentioned the Ecstatic Awakener line. That's certainly available to him, but he also has Bat Whisperer and Flesh Taker as well.
Yeah. And Paulo's probably going to wait until he can find a window to get damage in before playing out that Bat Whisperer. It looks like he's going to just probably look to either eat this zombie token or even the Occultist to grow the Awakener into a 4/4 to try to get the damage into to put the Bat Whisperer into play next turn. But a giant Drownyard Amalgam is going to be in the way, and Paulo won't be able to get in here.
Nice one. Rotten Reunion in the main deck here for Paulo Vitor, and that is a card that he's going to be able to put to very good use in this matchup as Rei Sato is leaning really hard on graveyard synergies through flashback to kind of power him into the late game.
Lot of interesting options here for Paulo. I mean, you see the pair of Flesh Takers that he can play this turn, meaning that if he attacks next turn, it might make blocks difficult. At the same time, I mean, he could just run out a Moorcrypt Behemoth this turn, sacrifice that zombie token to try to put some pressure on the battlefield. The one thing Paulo does have to be mindful of is the fact that Rei Sato does play multiple copies of Revenge of the Drowned in his deck, so it could be kind of a tempo disaster if you do run out the Behemoth this turn and then it gets bounced and you sack your zombie. So Paulo might want to just add more to the battlefield. So curious to see what he goes for here.
Yeah, only one card left in hand here for Sato. So, Paulo's probably thinking, well, I've got two good targets anyway, so maybe I'll just run out the Behemoth here. And it looks like that's what he's going to do, and it's going to pay off. There's no answer over there for Sato. Now, he can stem the bleeding with Winterthorn Blessing. That does keep the Behemoth at bay for multiple turns here and allows him to get a little bit of breathing room. But Sato would be kind of treading water at that point.
Yeah, and Sato, I mean, he's a little bit out of gas here. He can go with the Winterthorn Blessing, but not sure if he's going to be interested in attacking here. And he's what, 1 mana short? No, he can cast the Seize the Storm. Curious how big this is.
It's a 2/2.
That is
not really where you want to be.
Not
wow,
very
Novice
big.
Occultist is a nice one off the top here for Paulo as well. He's got the double Flesh Taker. By the way, just a snapshot here. I mean, Sato's down to just Winterthorn Blessing, and if you look at Paulo's hand, he's on 6 spells here. So as far as running out of gas goes, things definitely in Paulo's favor. And a nice turn for him, too. He gets to use up all 5 mana. After hitting for 7 with the Behemoth, he gets to follow up with Bat Whisperer and then another Ecstatic Awakener.
Yeah, so now, I mean, Ray just has so many different things that he needs to try to deal with here. You know, he's got an evasive creature attacking him and also that 7/6. Now, he did find that Revenge of the Drowned, so he will be able to keep that Behemoth at bay for a couple of turn cycles here, but still needs to kind of find some additional pieces of action here because Paulo still has a full grip.
Yeah, Sato's going to need to get something going along the lines of Rise of the Ants or something like that where he can really start to dump a bunch of mana into those. And instead, he's just going to pass a turn back with Revenge of the Drowned available. He's been reluctant to use Winterthorn Blessing. It looks like Ray wants to save it for a moment when he knows it'll clear the way for some really impactful attacks.
Man, that Drown Yard Amalgam is doing a lot of work here, though.
It is holding back a lot.
It's just Paulo has 5 creatures on the battlefield. 2 of them can potentially be 4/4s, and he just doesn't have a good attack with them.
In the meantime, he will chip in here with the 1/1 Flying Bat as well as the big hit from the Morkrit Behemoth and kind of force the issue here on Sato.
Yeah, I wonder if Sato's
big block incoming here. If he puts these 3 creatures on, it is enough to take out the Behemoth, and he would only lose 2 creatures. In fact, if he wants to lose 2, it's only the Rejuvenator and the 2/2, leaving him with the Amalgam behind. And he says, look, maybe I'll just let this happen. Yeah, seems fine.
It's pretty tempting to go for the Revenge of the Behemoth, but I mean, given the way that these blocks have been made, perhaps Ray is okay with this trade because, you know, given that Amalgam is still going to stay on the battlefield, that's going to still do a good job of keeping the Awakeners at bay.
Ray is toying with the idea of casting Revenge of the Drowned here. And he is going to go ahead and do that. Interesting decision point there for Rei Sato, because that was a trade that would also be acceptable for him, I think. You know, the Behemoth is a big problem for him. And getting it off the battlefield is pretty good. He probably figures, well, if that would have been good then, I can probably do this later, but I can also just set you back a lot by putting the Behemoth back either on top or bottom of your library, depending on Paulo's viewpoint on things.
Yeah, the other reason to maybe go for this here is if you do lose that Rejuvenator and a 2/2, you then all of a sudden start losing those additional creatures that would give you profitable double blocks with the Amalgam. You know, being able to double block with the Amalgam plus Rejuvenator is kind of the reason why Paulo's not attacking with these Ecstatic Awakeners.
That's right. All right, so Paulo decides he'd like to keep the Morkrit Behemoth, so that's going to go back on top of the library. In the meantime, only 1 damage gets through. But Paulo once again gets to follow up by using up all of his mana. He's going to go Shady Traveler into, looks like Flesh Taker. And an island off the top here for Sato. Not what he wanted to see at this point.
Yeah, and this Flesh Taker is really, really scary on this board. I mean, Sato could just potentially put all the creatures in front of it.
Mm-hmm.
But Sato might also want to, I mean, he is at 15. He's a little bit, he's pretty healthy here. But if things get a little dicey, he can stem the bleeding a little bit with the Winterthorn Blessing in his hand.
Very tough position here for Sato. Paulo Vitor has built out an impressive board. Remember, he also has that second Ecstatic Awakener that threatens to become another Awoken Demon. And that's another form of pressure and cards going into hand. As well as the Morkrit Behemoth still sitting on top of the library here for Paulo as well. So this is he's really giving Ray all he can handle here.
So it looks like we're casting...
Yeah, if he's casting something, it's Winterthorn Blessings.
Yeah. There it is.
And he is going to do so.
Oh, wow, getting aggressive.
This makes a lot of sense. It looks like Ray is looking at the situation here and saying, what this shows to me is a bit of desperation, right? Ray is looking at this board and saying, I am not going to win if this game continues in this way. I need to do something. And I don't know if you caught that, but Paulo's eyebrows went up a little bit like, oh, wow, you're getting in there? Okay. And, you know, to me, if I'm Paulo Vitor, that's kind of blood in the water. Like, I view that as my green light to start really trying to finish this game.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine Paulo's going to go for a fairly aggressive attack here, get some damage in, and perhaps also fire off that Rotten Reunion, right? I mean, there's a really juicy target there in the graveyard in the Winterthorn Blessing, and you can also use it as a combat trick. Given that you have that Flesh Taker in play, that's just a free +2/+2 that you could give on the Flesh Taker while eating that very powerful flashback spell in Ray's graveyard.
That's right. Ray is lining up a block of Unblinking Observer on Flesh Taker, which would force Paulo to sacrifice something here. It also means that Paulo doesn't get to do both things. He can't Ecstatic Awakener and keep his Flesh Taker around. He has to choose between the two.
Yeah.
But I think that suits Paulo just fine, for the reason that you mentioned. The Rotten Reunion in hand is very tempting here for Paulo Vitor to cast.
Swamp would be good. Oh, Swamp was a nice draw. This allows him to go Reunion into Flesh Taker if he wants.
Yep. And there it is, Rotten Reunion on the stack. That's going to take away really all the action here for Sato, who just finds a forest off the top of the library. He just cannot seem to find anything, and he's going to pack it in for game number 1 here, Paul. Paulo Vitor Damo da Rosa just never ran out of gas. He still had spells in hand even after he won that game.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, Paulo just drew those really key cards. We talked about how it's so important to find the Awakeners and the Flesh Takers to attack through what Ray's trying to do, and he drew almost all of them. And you know, Ray just couldn't quite get it going. Needed to kind of find some of his endgame cards. Wow, he's got a Storm the Festival. I missed that the first time I looked at his deck. But that is also a fantastic card. So again, we talked about how Ray's deck can really does a really good job of fighting once you kind of get to that late game, but just couldn't find those heavy hitters. But it looks like he's actually sideboarding out those Seize the Storms.
Yeah, maybe the Rotten Reunion was a bit of a wet blanket on that strategy.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I think that game was a bit of an outlier for Ray. That was the game where he ran out of gas. And looking at his deck, it just doesn't seem likely for him to do that very often. He just has a lot of ways to keep the cards flowing, keep casting them out of the graveyard, etc.
Yeah.
Okay, game number 2 incoming here in our opening round of the World Championship. We've got round number 1, booster draft. That's right, they're playing Innistrad Midnight Hunt, and Paulo Vitor Damo da Rosa, who we got to watch draft this deck, is now up a game on Rei Sato. Ray has easily the wildest deck of the pod here. He's gone deep, 3 colors. He's trimmed down his splash here, but he is still splashing for Moonrager's Slash. And this is really his key card. Root Coil Creeper is the best card in Rei Sato's deck, and he has it on turn 2. Is there an answer?
He has an answer, but it's on turn 3. And then Ray also looks like he sideboarded a Mysterious Tome, which is typically a card that's a little bit too slow against most of the decks in the format. But given that Paul is playing a slightly slower black-white, more controlling deck, an excellent card to sideboard in.
Yeah, I'll tell you, you lose a game by kind of flooding out, running out of action, and Mysterious Tome looks a little better. This is a turn 3 Gale Drifter, though, and again, Paulo just going, okay, I need to get a card out of this Blade Brand. He draws Champion of the Perished, but, we pointed it out when he was doing his initial build. This is not a zombie-optimized deck here. The Champion, even coming out early, is fairly medium for Paulo Vitor.
Yeah, and Paulo, given the pressure here, just not in a position to cast the No Way Out just yet, and looking to at least just try to slow down what Ray's trying to do on his side of the battlefield.
Can Ray add to the board here? Yes, he can play the Mysterious Tome. Borrowed time there from Paulo last turn. He had a choice on whether to hit Gale Drifter or the Creeper. He decided on the more powerful upside card in the Creeper, but he kind of signed up to take a bunch of damage from the Gale Drifter by doing so.
Yeah, Ray choosing to keep the heavy hitter here in the Tireless Hauler, and now has a pair of 5-drops. Really needs a land, though. He
did not hit. He's got Secrets of the Key, Tireless Hauler, and Candlelit Cavalry in hand. Meanwhile, Paulo is going to work on Rei Sato's hand. Back-to-back no way outs here for Paulo Vitor. He is just assaulting the hand of Rei Sato.
Yeah, and Sato with a decent start here, but the fact that he took a turn off didn't add anything to the battlefield, and now all of a sudden, Paulo's got a 3-3 champion of the parish here. He can even grow it even more, given with the Rotten Reunion that he has in hand.
Yeah, that champion's going to get out of hand. He hasn't actually cast a zombie spell. It's all decay zombies coming down here for Paulo, but good enough, says the champion. I wonder if he's going to hit that Secrets of the Key now just to get an extra damage in.
I mean, anytime you can just get an actual flashback or disturb card with that reunion, you probably just have to kind of fire it off.
Especially if you're going to throw in a +1/+1 counter for your troubles, right? That's Rotten Reunion overperforming right there. So, all right, this is big though. Rei Sato finds a land, plays Tireless Hauler.
Oh, wow.
And he has a blocker. Oh, and Olivia's Midnight Ambush off the top of the library for Paulo is exactly what he needed here.
He can attack now. Rei can't block because there's an on the board trick, right? There's a Rotten Reunion in the graveyard, so Paulo can turn that Champion of the Parish into a 5/5. Even if he didn't have it, he could use the Olivia's Midnight Ambush to shrink the Tireless Hauler and kill it as well. So now Paulo does have the option here of just passing the turn, casting Olivia's Midnight Ambush, getting the Tireless Hauler off the board, and still adding to the board with that Rotten Reunion in his graveyard.
Yeah, let's see what he wants to do, because he also could play Crossroads Candle Guide if he'd like, and leave up the Midnight Ambush. He's not going to be taking very much damage. It really depends on what he sees as the best target for ambush. The Tireless Hauler seems to be the obvious one, but he also could just use ambush to kill Gale Drifter if he chooses to, as it is cheap.
Yeah, and this is a main...
No cards in hand here for Sato. No mana available, and it is day, by the way.
Right, so the ambush would not kill the hauler.
Not quite.
Yeah, Paulo probably just thinking about kind of how this game can get away from him, and it might be through that flyer that's in play. Now, keep in mind, not the most effective thing to use a removal spell on the Gale Drifter. Rei has no cards in hand, so likely if he just draws a land, he's just gonna disturb it.
I mean, what he's thinking about is, do I Midnight Ambush and then play Crossroads Candle Guide to exile it?
Right. So you can play the Crossroads Candle Guide. The Tireless Hauler is a 4/5, right? So if you play the Candle Guide and just pass, you can just block the Tireless Hauler and give it -2/-2, right? And that
you could do that too. Yeah, that also works.
That would just get the Hauler off the battlefield.
This is an interesting decision point here for Damo da Rosa, because I think it's exactly what you said, Paul. It's how do I lose, right? What's the thing that's actually going to kill me? And he's decided that he can ignore the Gale Drifter. You know, he doesn't block the zombies particularly well, and the Champion of the Parish is already bigger than it. But remember, there is that tome over there that is, you know, going to be an alternate card draw engine / tapper here for Sato going forward.
Yeah, and by the way, this is also one of the main reasons why the werewolf strategy has not been performing particularly well, right? I mean, you play your big creature, and there's just a number of ways you can just get punished. Olivia's Midnight Ambush being one of the biggest ones.
That's right. It'll kill any of the vampires on their night mode. And of course, Defenestrate does exactly the same thing. And even Silverbolt will take out any of the werewolves.
Yeah. So with the Rotten Reunion, Paulo can potentially put 11 damage on the battlefield here. Now we do have, of course, the tome that can tap down the zombie for a turn.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Paulo probably just wants to maximize on his mana usage here in case he draws a 2-drop next turn and pump up the Champion of the Parish this turn.
He drew Eaten Alive.
Wow.
Not a bad draw step here. I'm also curious to see if he's going to send in with the zombies. This is a pretty good opening to get in if he prioritizes the damage from those zombies. Remember, he doesn't have any siege zombies or anything like that to take advantage of these. The only thing that he can do with them is either attack with them or sacrifice them, and he's going to attack with all of them. 2, 4, 6, 8. Down to 4 goes Rei Sato, and he's surely on the ropes. That's right. We get to watch all of these things.
Every single one. Every
right.
single one.
And it looks like we're just going to see Crossroads Candle Guide here come down once again, pick at the graveyard here of Sato, but Sato needs to find Rise of the Ants or something like that, like now. And it's another forest. All right, but he does have the Mysterious Tome.
Yeah, main phase draw. Needs to find another answer, though. He needs to find a way.
Storm the Festival, which he can't
not
cast right now. And that means that he's going to lose, assuming that Paulo goes for it. Vanquish the Horde off the top doesn't do anything here, but you know what does? Eaten alive your Gale Drifter and hit you for 8. And that is going to be plenty enough to get the job done here. Paulo Vitor Damo da Rosa takes one step, really early step, towards becoming a back-to-back world champion. Let's not forget, though, these draft rounds are critical. This represents 30% of the total Swiss play as we lead up to the top 4 cut. And that means that these things, that each and every one of these rounds is super important. If you can come away with a 3-0 out of the booster draft, you're actually in really good shape at that point.